All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started this morning. So good morning to everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to today's webinar, How Risk Managers Can Adjust for the Next Normal, presented by OnSpring. I'll be your moderator. My name is Jason Rolfe, and I'll be moderating the discussion with two great risk professionals today. We'll introduce these guys in just a second. Before we get started, I'd like to just kind of go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, your line is going to be muted throughout the duration of this conversation, but feel free to use the Q&A function within Zoom to submit any questions that you have. We do have a pretty full agenda, and there's a lot that we're going to try to go over, and we're going to do our best to get your questions answered during the presentation, but certainly we'll be looking to help give you some answers, regardless of whether or not we can get them answered specifically on the webinar. Throughout the presentation, you'll also be invited to participate in a couple of different polls. We're really interested to hear your perspective on the things that we're discussing, so look for those as we go through the presentation. Just so you know, the presentation will be recorded and made available to you and to the other participants once the recording or once the session is complete. So even if you have to jump off early or you missed a little bit, fear not, we will be recording this, and we are currently recording. And finally, just as a general statement, I will say that the views of today's panelists are really their own and don't necessarily represent the opinions of their specific companies. This is all of us just kind of talking as practitioners and kind of thinking through what this means for us. So hopefully you'll find this to be a good and meaningful discussion. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. So again, how risk managers can adjust for the next normal. First, I'll introduce myself. Again, my name is Jason Rolfe. I'm the Vice President of Solutions with OnSpring. OnSpring, as many of you know, is a cloud-based platform on top of which we build a number of different solutions that solve a wide variety of business problems. My team is primarily responsible for building, maintaining, improving those core solutions, developing and implementing new solutions that we can go to market with and that we can use to help solve our clients' problems. We have a very close interaction with multiple teams within OnSpring, the product team, the sales team, the services team, just sort of run point on a lot of different conversations. We run practitioner focus groups. So just getting like-minded individuals like Rick and Brian here together and kind of talking through issues facing certain practice groups. And then certainly we work with our services partners, our technology partners. So a lot of cool and interesting things that I get to do as a part of my job, but more cool and interesting than me are my panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of these guys. So I'll start with Brian Hill. Brian is a Senior Vice President of Risk Management at Cameron Mutual. They're a regional insurance firm. Brian's been a customer for a short time, but he's really already done some really neat things that I've seen. So Brian, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
And then my other panelist is Rick Good. Rick is the VP of ERM at Ceridian. They're a global human capital management software company. Rick's primary responsibilities lie in the areas of corporate risk management as well as business continuity. And Brian also, I know, has some responsibility for business continuity as well. Per Rick, he has been a happy customer for 5 years running, and we really appreciate Rick because he's always been an active participant in everything we do. So Rick, good morning and welcome.
Thanks, Jason.
Great. All right, so no time like the present. Let's get right into the conversation. So today we are really kind of going to do something a little bit different. We're going to try to pull out our proverbial crystal ball. We're going to become soothsayers, so to speak, and explore a couple of different topics in the realm or the area of risk management, and really try to explore, given all of the way the world has changed in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, what are some of the shifts or some of the changes that we might see in the risk management world? How is this going to impact folks who are in the risk management practitioner world or in some practice area that is sort of tangential to that? So we're going to go through a couple of different topics. I won't tip my hand too much on the specifics of each topic. We'll get into each one as we go through. But really the idea is just to sort of foster a conversation, sort of a healthy debate on where might things be headed for this profession. So without further ado, let's get into our first topic. Okay, so global view. We will all think globally. So if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that, events in far off corners of the world can have massive repercussions to other parts to seemingly disconnected parts of the world, or even seemingly disconnected organizations, right? So regardless of the size, the geography, the scope of your business, the future is really going to require you to start seriously considering things that are well beyond your sphere of influence and seemingly outside of the scope of what you've traditionally focused on. The organization of the future is going to need to be able to think like this if they want to be able to survive and thrive in this type of environment. So with all that being said, I'm going to start with Rick and kind of get your perspective. So Rick, I'm curious to know the impacts that the pandemic has had on your organization, and also what your thoughts are on the type of risks that fall into this, call it the far-flung global category, that maybe have made their way onto your radar.
Yeah, so I would say Ceridian in general has fared pretty well through this. We made the shift like everybody else did to virtual work, and kind of went through that without any serious bumps. We were able to continue with our sales pipeline. Implementations were shifted to virtually. Customer support teams were able to shift to the virtual call centers for responding to our customers. So from that perspective, we've done pretty well. There's obviously been some learnings from that. One of the things that was kind of unique is early in the year, we were in the middle of an acquisition of a company in the APAC region. What Ceridian was looking to do was expand our reach into other areas of the globe. And we're looking at this acquisition to help us do that. Again, in the middle of that in January, February, when the pandemic hit, that kind of put the brakes on everything there. There was just too much unknown with the company primarily operating out of Singapore and having a large presence in India and in Malaysia and the Philippines. Concerns there around, was it the right time to do that acquisition or not? So, like I said, that kind of put the brakes on that, which was something we would have never expected out of any other kind of a risk impacting thing like an epidemic or even like hurricanes or anything like that we've dealt with a lot in the past. Happy to say that we've been able to continue that recently, and we announced on May 6th that acquisition will go through for us, and we're excited about that. But again, just something that we never would have anticipated here that was an impact. I think for us going forward, we're going to be looking more from a global perspective, and we've done that in a way, but focus more on where we had presence, where we had offices, where we have people. North America, UK, Australia, Mauritius. We've got offices and people kind of spread across the globe already, but not in all countries. And if we look back now and say if we would have monitored a little more closely what was going on in China and what that potential impact could have been as it spread globally, we could have been more proactive in some of the steps that we took. And we had plans in place, but just being able to execute sooner on some of those things and being a little bit more planful. So I think as we look forward in that respect, we will have more of a global lens on everything. And for us, it's really protecting our operations, our finance, our company reputation, those types of things.
Yeah, the couple of words and things that you said, Rick, that popped out. Definitely kind of this, just the fact that you guys happen to be looking at this acquisition, almost by happenstance, you're like, oh wow, there's something happening in this corner of the globe that could potentially have repercussions. And also that concept of hindsight, right? Everybody talks about hindsight, and oddly enough, hindsight being 2020, what better year to have hindsight be a major concept here. Of course, everyone wishes they could operate with the benefit of hindsight, but certainly being able to at least take that and apply that as a lesson learned is definitely something I think is valuable. Brian, I'm interested, same sort of question for you. How has this impacted you guys? And the other question I actually had for you, and it was something interesting you had brought up, was what are some of the consequences that you guys have personally seen coming out of this? I'm particularly interested in your perspective, given that you work for an insurance company. So whatever you're willing to share here.
Yeah, so I'll echo what Rick had mentioned. We pivoted very quickly at Cameron. So We are not the size of Rick's organization, but we were able to, within 48 hours, pivot to have 95% of our folks working remotely. Really haven't skipped a beat from an operational standpoint at Cameron Mutual. In all honesty, we are indirect impact from a global view. So we focus really on regional, and then when we start focusing on, disasters and insurance, it's really around where we're at, the tornadoes, the hail, etc. And you kind of keep in your far off mind things that may be going on globally that could or could not impact you. And this has certainly changed our mindset going forward in terms of how we'll view risk. One thing that's interesting about insurance companies, and I'm not sure if everyone understands this, there is a concept called reinsurance, which is really insurance for the insurance companies. And so it is a global market. And so what we will see, our estimates coming up at the end of the year as we go through that renewal process, is an impact due to this pandemic from a global point of view that will directly impact us in our reinsurance renewal. And so that will be an interesting thing for us to follow over the next few years. It's very similar to when the tsunamis hit Japan. You never would think that would impact a carrier in the middle of Missouri, but it did from a reinsurance renewal perspective. In terms of our direct business, we are still monitoring, like a lot of people. You've probably seen some impacts in the short term, but over the next few months, we'll have a very good idea of what this pandemic means for us for the next 2 or 3 quarters.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And it is interesting. We've talked about you guys being a regional insurer, but even it's not only the risks themselves or the things happening in other parts of the globe that could potentially impact you and impact your company, your customers. But certainly you guys have already had direct experience with global events impacting you as an organization from a financial standpoint, right? Just the impact of the costs in the reinsurance market. So no, that's great perspective. Real quick, I'm going to launch the first poll. I'm kind of interested to know what everyone else's perspective is on sort of how this has maybe changed your view. And while I do that, another quick question, just out of curiosity, and Brian, maybe I'll start with you on this one. Have you guys seen any kind of new or interesting questions being asked of you as a risk management professional by your senior leadership or your board?
Sure.
I'm going to guess yes.
How could we have prevented this? No, in all seriousness, there's things that you do through, we call it disaster planning or business continuity planning, that we try to prevent a lot of impact to your business if something were to happen. And something that we don't do a lot of here, we talk a lot about it, but we don't ever actually do it, was the actual disaster testing, if you will. We do a lot of open table conversations. So what would we do and how we go handle it? But we've never really had the push, if you will, to say, okay, tornadoes hit, home office, go. What this pandemic has provided us is an opportunity, and I use that term very, very loosely, given all the impacts this thing is, the pandemic has had globally, but given us an opportunity to test our disaster recovery plan or business continuity plan. So we know what works, and we certainly know what doesn't work. And so now we have the opportunity to adjust going forward. In terms of our board and senior leadership, they've been very pleased with how fast we were able to keep things going, and they understand there's only so much within our air quote control that we can do in terms of managing this pandemic.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's nice to hear that they're being pragmatic about it, right? Although, that joking statement you made, I'm guessing that probably 1 or 2 folks on the call probably got asked that question in reality. Rick, how about you? Like, what sort of interesting sort of questions or feedback have you gotten from leadership?
I think it really is taken into consideration a little bit more than what we had when we're assessing risk, around primarily focused on what the operational impacts and the financial impacts and customer impacts and those types of things, but really looking now at what are the impacts for strategic and growth. As I mentioned, the acquisition is taking things like that into consideration and understanding that pipeline, as well as our sales and customer pipeline type of things.
Yep.
Another interesting thing that came up was around insurance for us in these types of events, and making sure that our insurance policies cover off on some of the things we might need them to cover in an event like this if we were to lose workforce or lose a significant amount of our customers based on the pandemic. For us being a human capital management company, if companies lay off people, then we're making less money because that's where we earn our money, is the per employee pricing. So it's planning for those types of things and being able to look at it from a deeper financial perspective as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's certainly shifted everybody's way of thinking in some way, shape, or form. I can't think of anyone I've talked to who said, I'm just going about my business the way I normally do. And I'm going to share the poll results real quick. I would say that these poll results probably go well along the lines of that. When I look at these and I see that 20% who said their thinking hasn't changed, my suspicion is those are folks that maybe work at organizations that have already kind of adopted that global mindset or have had really no choice given how their organization is set up. I would think that it would probably be closer to 100% that are at least looking at something that can be done differently or validating what's already been done. Okay, so quickly, before we move into the next topic, just to kind of give you a couple of takeaways, right? Just things that you might be thinking of or strategies you can employ today. Certainly evaluating what, indirect impact some of these other global events or activities might be having on your organization. It's really kind of thinking through, almost those black swan type of events. Hey, this is the most catastrophic thing that can happen to our organization. And even if traditionally we've looked at that as a very, very slim likelihood, if at all, of ever happening, there might be more attention placed on those and certainly more techniques for being able to kind of address those types of risks. Also understanding, and Rick, I think this is something that we chatted about the other day, but what impacts does this not just have on your organization, but sort of upstream on your supply chain? Does that impact your key suppliers, your suppliers' key suppliers? So kind of extending that third-party risk mindset beyond just those immediate vendors is likely going to take on more importance and a great place for folks to look. And then certainly just never a bad thing to just look at what the weak spots in your own organization might be, right? Just kind of doing that honest self-assessment. Okay. Good information, guys. Really appreciate that. Let's move on to the next sort of topic. So understanding interconnected risks becomes priority. So one of the most important skills that you guys have and that others have is a risk manager and a continuity manager, right? Kind of on the front lines of making sure that nothing impedes the business's ability to keep doing what it's intending to do. One of the most important skills you guys can bring is the ability to not just be able to categorize and quantify those risks, but also kind of demonstrate the impact that those risks might have on one another. It's not necessarily going to be enough just to say, here's an individual threat, here's an individual opportunity. I'm going to analyze each of these in its own little vacuum. I think risk managers and continuity managers are really going to be expected to better demonstrate sort of the interconnectivity of those risks in more meaningful ways. So Brian, I'll start with you. In your role as a risk manager and a continuity manager, what are some of the actions you've taken to kind of to take this sort of approach to say, hey, I want to understand how certain risks might not just be impacting the organization, but sort of driving each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like many organizations, as we've built and grown our program here, we've started to shift from what I would call a vertical or a siloed approach to a horizontal approach. And articulating exactly what you're describing there, Jason, in terms of how does risk A impact risk 1 over here. Mm-hmm. And what I have found is through a lot of missteps, I found a few things that have worked. This is usually the story of success, is what you do wrong to do better. In all honesty, it's easier to sit down with somebody and explain by visually showing them and walking them through how they all are interconnected, as opposed to showing some dashboard and talking about a dashboard. It's really that connectivity and that collaboration of how it all works. And you find a lot of times that the people on the receiving end of the message have understood it all along. They just haven't had that message put in a way to where it was real to them. And so that's what we've started to do here is much more frequent touch points, working with people in our underwriting and our claims and our actuarial and our marketing folks to sit down and understand how decision or impact over and on this risk over here is impacting the entire, process or flow of operation. And so far, it's worked out pretty well.
That's great. And when you talked about tried some things that didn't work and you kind of keep going, honestly the thing I wrote down was Thomas Edison. I'm like, you don't get to something meaningful unless you've kind of flubbed at it a little bit, right? And tried something. But I think to me the thing I mine out of what you just said is just trying things, trying new ways, and looking at things just from a different perspective. Even if that perspective ends up being relatively fruitless, the fact that you've pursued it, part of getting to what's right is eliminating what doesn't work, right? So I like that approach, definitely. Rick, I kind of just alluded to it in the last slide, but I want to get a little bit more into it because you had some interesting perspectives, kind of how your whole mindset has been, particularly in third-party risk evaluation, and how you guys have already adjusted that. So I'm interested to hear your thought process on that.
Sure. So we've historically done evaluations of our third parties as we bring them on as third parties for us and doing reevaluations annually on those. From a business continuity perspective, it was more around just ensuring that they had business continuity plans in place and actions. But we've changed the depth at which we're asking questions now. And again, we're all learning from this and what we need to do. But before it was around, do you have a plan in place? Where with COVID-19, we went out and asked more pointed questions via a survey on, how will you handle mass absenteeism? Have you evaluated your third party? So our fourth parties to understand, to your point earlier about the upstream potential impacts to us. And then, evaluating their responses to that. And we asked them for their plans or business continuity statements, whatever they had prepared, and looking through those to see if we felt like there were any risk in there. From them as a provider to us. If there were, then we looked at, do we need to consider any contingencies for this? Do we need to have another third party in place? Or is this something that we could do ourselves for a period of time, depending on what the service was? So, it definitely changed from that perspective. I would say, another area where another learning as we went into this is through our business impact assessment process for business continuity, we identified those functions that were critical in the organization and had those pretty well documented, but we didn't get down to that level of what we were considering the essential employees. So those people that need to be in a facility to do their role, and we have a handful of those. And most of it is around our print production teams for check printing and state printing and different things where they physically have to be there to do that. So now we've gotten to that level of identifying who those people are in what locations, and then identifying their backups. In some cases we can move the whole production operation to another center, or it may be a specific person that backs up an individual. So just going deeper, like I said, into this, learning from what's impacted us here. The other thing about interconnected risk, and we started this actually last year, was looking through our risk inventory and looking for where those overlaps or those connectors are. And we've kicked off, I think over the past 2 years, about 4 strategic risk initiatives where we'll bundle up those risks together and have a project manager kind of run with that and work with the teams to work on those collectively. So it's not just addressing a single risk at a time, it's combining things together and being able to attack them a little bit more focused.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. That's really interesting when you think about, when you talk about kind of that level of granularity you're getting down to. And it really, if you're going to not just be able to, articulate what that risk, what the impact or the potential impact of that risk is to your organization, but certainly how it drives the needle on other things that you're dealing with or exposures that you're managing. It seems to me that getting down to that level of granularity has been helpful. It sounds like it has from your perspective. And the third party thing is always interesting because obviously there's only so much influence you guys can exert over your third parties, but you want to exert as much as possible and certainly consider what those potential ripple effects are through their chain of kind of influence, right? I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Rick. I was just real quick. I'm going to launch the next poll so folks can kind of give their feedback here. But I'm also interested in kind of hearing from you guys. We've talked about interconnectivity of risks and Rick, with your strategic, kind of, that strategic risk assessment or evaluation approach. And, Brian, you kind of talking about some of the different things you've done to really, demonstrate the connection between those risks. Do you guys have any ideas or thoughts on what are some of those indicators within a risk or those qualities of a risk that can cause you to, that can be used to help drive the needle on another risk? Brian, what do you think about that?
Well, that's a great question. I was hoping you go Rick first on that one. I don't know if there's one answer for that, because at least here, all of our risks are different in a sense. What I would say is, as we manage our risks and we understand what maybe something over in the market competitor enterprise risk, some of those risk limits and measurements, we have an understanding of how that impacts our growth risk, how it impacts our premium surplus risk. Having that overall knowledge, we'll know then when we do I like to say the tactical side of it, where we are measuring it quarterly, seeing the impact, seeing if it's outside of our range, engaging in the action plans, engaging in to go to manage that risk. We have that visibility through the platform that we have now with OnSpring to go do that through the workflows we're building and the measurements and the thresholds. So I'm not sure if that entirely answers your question, but that's how we have, when we say move the needle of another risk, it really means, in my view, is how is something over here in risk A, knowing it's interconnected to risk 1, how is that going to be viewed, managed through action plans and risk mitigation, or whatever your viewpoint is on that. So that's how we're doing it here today, and we'll continue to evaluate and grow as we go forward.
Sure. No, and interestingly enough, it may just, what causes one risk to impact, or the impact that one risk has on another, certainly is going to depend on that level of granularity. What is the nature of those two items? And it could just be situational, and Rick, I don't know if you have any thoughts to add on some of the things that you think might move that needle on one side or another.
Yeah, so I think Brian must have had visibility to my notes, because he said a lot of for me, when I looked at the elements of a risk, I kind of went a different direction with like mitigation focus, and really looking at, to your point, Brian, risk A, if you can drive down the risk, to a lower residual risk on that one, that has a positive impact on risk B. So it's kind of gets back to that whole strategic view and looking at what's your risk inventory and where can you get the most result by putting mitigation efforts against it. So that's kind of the approach I took, and by doing that, then you can lower the overall risk of all your interconnected risk that you have in your inventory.
Sure. It's a great point, Rick. Absolutely. And Brian, a question actually came in for you, is just kind of curious if you could provide a more specific example of the types of risks you are measuring. Like what should folks be looking at in terms of what's new and what's emerging?
Well, I'll just give you an example of the interconnectivity we have here.
Okay.
So we have an enterprise risk that we have labeled competitor market activity. And within that risk, we have different measurements based on our segments of business. And we have a measurement called hit ratio. What that really is how many applications are you getting, and how many of those applications are being then uploaded to active policies. And so in our world, if we have a range, and so what we did is figure out what is the right range for business segment A. And so every quarter we go measure that to see where we're at. And so we know if we're below that, or on the lower end of that range for that hit ratio, we know we probably have a problem in terms of maybe our rates are not within the marketplace. We have some coverages that need to be reviewed. Or the other side of it is, if it's way on the top end of it, we know that the market has found us. And sometimes that's not always good. That usually means you have something wrong with your price or something wrong with your coverage. And so a real life example was around the end of the year, first part of January, ran the measurement for one of our segments, and our hit ratio was way through the roof. And so that immediately clicked onto one of our action items, which involved marketing, the underwriting, the actuarial, and the claims folks sitting in a room analyzing the hit ratio of that segment and figuring out our action plans to go bring that back within range. Within 3 months, we had developed action plans in terms of marketing activities, in terms of underwriting activities, and in terms of the next rate analysis for that line for our actuarial folks to go drive down that hit ratio to be within a more acceptable range for camera. So that's kind of an example that we've had here of you have one enterprise risk that impacts a number of others, because I don't want to get too long-winded here, Jason, but hit ratios being too high will impact your growth, will impact your premium surplus. So there's other enterprise risks that are dependent upon that. And so we knew immediately that we had an issue. We brought in all the interconnected departments that have different stakes in that risk, and then we developed a plan and started executing very quickly. If we did not have what we have today, we probably would have noticed it a year from there, and who knows where we would have been at in terms of challenges in that segment.
No, Brian, thank you for offering that. No, it's a great point, and it's interesting. I've never really thought about it like that before, but a couple of things that resonated with me is, you talk about hit ratio, and certainly that, is an insurance industry kind of metric. It's something that I'm sure others in your industry rely on, and the thing that makes me think of is, the types of risks, the nature of some of the risks that you guys are all going to be managing are going to be pretty standard across any organization, a cybersecurity risk or financial material misstatement or any of those things. But there's also going to be those that are very specific to the world in which you truly operate, the industry that you're in. So kind of finding a balance between those. And then the other thing I really liked that you said was talking about sort of that cross-functional component. It isn't just the responsibility necessarily of this risk management team to tell the organization how they're going to do things. Everybody's got a stake in that. And everybody, if you're really going to be able to demonstrate true interconnectivity between these things, it sounds like, getting all of the key players in the front line, call them the first line people who are really impacting and impacted by that, they're going to be a kind of a primary and a very critical resource as you try to understand how these things are interconnected.
Correct. Yes, I would agree with that.
Great. So yeah, just quickly sharing these poll results, how have folks enhanced their ability to connect these risks? Well, it looks like technology is kind of the primary, front runner. Obviously, if we're talking about being data rich and mining data and using that to help drive ratings and evaluations, we'll definitely talk about that here in just a second. But that certainly isn't surprising. Again, when I see no changes, I don't necessarily think that means that folks are just being like, nope, everything's fine, we're going to keep doing it the same way. There are different organizations in different kind of areas and different, I guess, positions of maturity. So a lot of times I look at that and say, oh, okay, well, that's maybe someone who's maybe a little bit ahead of the curve. Or on the flip side, it could be, hey, we don't have the resources right now to really think about this. We've got bigger fish to fry. So just interesting to kind of see these poll results. All right, so before we move on to that next topic, just a couple of additional things that you and your teams can maybe consider as you go through and think about this concept of interconnectivity of risk. Certainly skill sets come into play here. What do you have the skill sets, the ability to provide better results? Enabling the team with training is, obviously in these practitioner worlds that we all live in, training is essential because things are constantly changing. So, staying abreast of new developments, staying on top of new capabilities, new technologies is certainly something that can enhance your capability. And then, obviously exploring, technologies, processes, and one I'd throw in here as well, based on what you said is, really fostering that cross-functional environment. And then back to what Rick said, not neglecting the concept of third-party risk. How do those third parties not just address third-party risk, but how are they involved or sort of attached to other things that you guys are managing internally? Okay. This one I really liked. It was interesting. This one probably sparked a lot of good conversation between myself and Brian and Rick when we were preparing for this concept of risk tolerance, fostering a culture of innovation. So here's kind of what we mean here. The phrase that popped into my head immediately was necessity is the mother of invention, right? So as a result of the pandemic, we feel like the mindset on risk is naturally going to shift to a little bit more of a conservative viewpoint. or at the very least, any company that's evaluating, higher levels of risk tolerance is going to look at those situations with a much heavier level of scrutiny than they probably have in the past, right? So as a result, if we're tightening the screws a little bit, we're tightening up the way we're doing things. Organizations and certainly risk management continuity functions are really going to be forced to innovate and come up with interesting new ways to address certain risk areas that maybe they just don't have the tolerance for doing things the old way or doing things a traditional way. So this was a really curious and interesting topic for me. So Brian, I'll kind of start with you. How do you see these perspectives shifting as it relates to an organization's willingness to accept risk? And also, I'm curious to know what impact you think this has on the profession of being a risk manager.
So I'll probably answer it first more broadly. I think
okay.
For us here at Cameron, I think we have started to slowly migrate our risk tolerance when it comes to innovation in terms of being more acceptance of innovative ideas, whether or not they may fail or succeed,
mm-hmm.
Growing and advancing in that in the innovation of what we do. With this global pandemic, I see the natural reaction will be to kind of coil up from an organizational standpoint, make sure you're doing things that provide that true value, maybe cutting budgets, etc. Which is all fine. There's a financial side of everything. However, I think here at Cameron, what we're really focused on from a leadership perspective is continuing to focus on innovation, because we know that that's just the key for us. Now, in terms of risk management, it'll be no different than any other discipline here. We'll leverage innovation and we'll leverage technology to drive efficiencies across our processes. We're starting that process now with OnSpring in terms of some things we're enhancing in our risk management module, and we'll continue to move forward with that. So I think this crisis and pandemic that we're in today has given us the cattle prod push, if you will, in the back to leverage the technology and innovation around all disciplines, including risk management here.
That's a great point. It just immediately conjured up a phrase I sometimes unfortunately have to use with my kids, which is you can like it or you can lump it, but you got to deal with it, right? It's one of those situations where the cattle prod is a good it's a great Midwestern analogy, by the way. I love to hear that from a fellow Midwesterner. But no, it really is. It's this impetus to again sort of push you down the road of innovation, of coming up with new and creative ways of doing things. And speaking of which, Rick, when we were talking the other day, you had a really interesting example of a very concrete example of how your organization kind of innovated in light of this whole crisis. So I'm hoping you could share that perspective with the participants.
Sure. Like every other company, as we were going through this, there were several different things that we needed to track and be able to report on, and that came through various methods of emails coming in or using Excel spreadsheets to track things. One of them that was important for us was the ability for our employees to let us know if they were experiencing COVID symptoms or if they've been diagnosed with COVID. To be able to track that and be able to help them where we can, where we need to help them out, whether it's, with their work, with, anything personally that they needed. But the big concern there was, starting to delve into that personal health information space and, asking them about symptoms and when they became ill and all of that. We put a process in place on the front end where they basically just sent an email very generically into a mailbox. We responded to them, engaged our human resources people. But we found it a little bit cumbersome and again, the risk there with the privacy information. So, after we kind of got the process defined on what that looked like, we then worked with our Dayforce team. So Dayforce is our flagship product for Ceridian for human capital management. So we worked with them on putting a module in place where an employee, which they already go into Dayforce frequently to do training and log information for hourly employees. That's where they do their clock in, clock out type functions. So we put a form in place there that they could go into, in really short form, but I'm experiencing symptoms, I've been tested, I haven't been tested, those types of things. And then when they submitted that form, it went into queue. That queue was restricted, so role-based. Very few people could get to that to see what information was in there. But it gave us a quick way to be able to track, those employees that were ill, be able to calculate, when they could return to work. Early on, that meant back in an office. Now it just meant, working at home, which a lot of them would do anyway. But it also, give us the ability to track who they came in contact with. That was one of the questions, is that whole contact tracing side of things, and what that meant, and give the human resources people the ability to reach out to those folks to let them know, you may have been potentially exposed to this, take whatever personal steps that you feel are appropriate. So after we got that in place, then it was really looking at how do we make this available to our customers, and really packaged up what we called like the core modules. So each company can go in and configure. It's a lot like OnSpring. You can go in and configure the modules whichever way best fits your organization. So we rolled that out to our customers. We did some webinars, put together training materials and different things, and it was very well received. And a lot of our customers are using that. And we've heard back that they've done configurations on their own for other things that they want to capture from that perspective as well. So yeah, I think that was a big win for us, and leveraging our own tools and being able to help our customers at the same time.
That's it. Yeah, I really liked that story, and thank you for sharing that, Rick. One thing that I found really interesting about that, and it's something that we talk a lot about. I'm sure you guys talk about a lot as well in your roles. Is that and I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll while we kind of chat about this. Is that good risk management practices is just good business practice? So, Rick, I think that's a really good sort of way to highlight that. You were doing something to address or to manage a concern, a risk, a challenge that you were having internally, and ultimately this was something that you were able to kind of roll out to your customers and assist your customers. And Brian, being in the insurance industry, I think a lot of folks are also looking to you guys to kind of innovate in terms of how can you model coverage to make it most cost efficient, but also kind of take on the most amount of concern from those organizations. So both of those concepts I think are really great in terms of how a risk management mindset is not just about telling people what they can't do. It's about being flexible and seeing things from multiple angles, and that's where true innovation kind of stems from, which I think is really interesting. Another quick question, just to follow up on that, and I'll start with you, Brian. What do you think is, and is this going to maybe be a little bit of hyperbole here, but what is one of the most important things that an organization, one of the most important characteristics, I should say, that an organization can have if it hopes to truly foster an innovative environment?
Well, I would say, as we are trying to change our culture here in terms of innovation, one of the things I think is critical is creating a culture that is where people are not afraid to fail. And what I mean by fail is innovative ideas are not always going to be hitting a home run, if you will. You're going to stub your toe, you're going to fall short, but having that leadership and that culture to where it's okay, you learn from it, you move forward, is something I think is critical. And that's something we're really working on here at Cameron, is trying to shift that culture here to where we're not such a risk avoidance culture, if you will, but we're one is supporting that it's okay to fail as we move forward, and not being afraid of that failure, because we're being honest with ourselves. When you start talking about innovative ideas, a lot of those will fail, and then you will learn and adapt and grow from those. And that's what we're trying to do here.
That's really interesting feedback. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Rick, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think similar to Brian is the thing that I thought about here is just making sure you give a voice to everybody in the organization to be able to be innovative. And fortunately for us as a technology company, I feel like Ceridian's done a really good job with this, and the product feature that I was just talking about for the safety monitor tracking, and that a lot of the modules that are in our Dayforce environment are things that came from frontline workers and from other people across the organization, not just out of our product development team. So, but it gets back to that no idea is a stupid idea kind of concept. And, it's worth taking a look at to see if it makes sense to help us or to help our customers.
Excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. Yeah, it's I think it's talking about getting that feedback or getting those ideas from the front line, from the customers. It just, shows having a sort of an open mindset in terms of those ideas, or those ideas for innovating can really come from anywhere. It doesn't just have to come from one small group or just even from within the organization. So yeah, it's really interesting stuff. Just to quickly share this poll result, what steps have you guys taken to improve your current approaches? Again, kind of the two favorites are, sort of addressing kind of those weaknesses, right? Anytime you do a stress test and you see where something's about to give, that's the area that requires your attention. That makes a lot of sense. As well as maybe looking at business from a different angle. What is something that we haven't really evaluated or haven't really given the proper amount of thought to. So I really appreciate that feedback. Okay. Just a couple of things to leave you with in the terms of this concept of risk tolerance and innovation. Obviously, I think the poll results clearly reflect this. Let's go to the areas where we know we require improvement, or we just don't know what's happening, right? Start thinking about those things that previously were unthinkable, and just, consider it, right? Having that culture where you're not afraid to try something and maybe fail. And really, to Brian's point, having leadership that supports that is going to be really critical. And then obviously just coming up with new and creative ideas to solve a risk, to mitigate a risk. Again, to Brian's point, we can't all just curl up in the fetal position and expect all of the risks to just leave us alone and go away, right? This is just something that's always kind of present. We're dealing with threats and opportunities, and we might just need to come up with, new and innovative ways of thinking of that. And a good way to do that is to kind of get your hands dirty, right? Get into the details, run more scenarios. Again, Brian talked about it earlier when he talked about his continuity planning. Hey, it's great to do a tabletop read, but we're really going to dive in and do a full-blown simulation to really understand where those kind of pockets of concern are. Okay, technology. Everyone loves technology, right? Maybe they don't. So risk management is like a lot of other areas that we all deal with, is definitely becoming a more data reliant practice. I think the days of kind of the simplistic risk evaluation techniques are going to go by the wayside. I think the more data rich these organizations become, the more information that's available, the more risk managers are going to be expected to leverage that wealth of data and information to come up with more meaningful analyses and come up with deeper insights to what's happening in the organization, even to become more predictive in those analyses. So really, we feel like risk management functions are just going to really have no choice but to really embrace technology, leverage that data to really provide value to the organization. So Rick, I'm curious to know from your perspective, where do you think the average risk management group is, or risk management function is, in terms of, call it the maturity level, with leveraging technology, with leveraging data? And if you don't, just kind of depending on your answer, what steps do you think they could potentially take to improve that?
Yeah, when I think about risk management traditionally, it's all been around the measuring likelihood and impact, and taking into consideration velocity, detectability, and other values, and not really in a silo, but not taking all the other external factors into consideration. Earlier I mentioned, about the strategic initiatives, or the looking at acquisitions and mergers, or looking at customer pipeline and those types of things. But I really think it's factoring in some of those things as well when you're looking at that. And what we've started to work on, for what we're affectionately calling Risk 2.0 for us, is building out on-spring risk assessment process for us to include some of those additional categories and factors, and doing individual scoring on those. Taking duration those other external factors that I mentioned. And I think it's also important for us to know what's going on in the business, as far as the business models, and how any risk, an individual risk or combinations of risk, could have an impact on that, and being able to report that up effectively.
Yeah, interesting point. The going down to that deeper level of granularity, considering factors that maybe haven't been considered before. Those all seem like, opportunities to leverage real information. And obviously a big challenge is getting down to what is that set of data that's going to properly help me quantify this aspect of a risk or this risk in general. Brian, from your perspective, how do you feel like a more robust set of analytics could potentially help risk managers, continuity managers demonstrate value to the organization?
Well, I'll kind of go back to my example we had here. So if we would rewind time, if you will, where we're at in our journey, to say 2 years ago on our risk management journey, the scenario I gave you in regards to the hit ratio and the impact to our other enterprise risks around growth and surplus and everything else, it would never have happened. We never would have sat in that room. We never would have made the decisions we made in a much more proactive manner to us there. And what I'm trying to get at is, I'm as big a data analytics guy there is. I'm very passionate about it. In fact, we're building out a large data strategy here, and I'm a big proponent of that. However, if you don't have the analytics presented in a way that the appropriate people can take the appropriate action at the right time, it doesn't really help, right? And so what we're really focused on is that. So how can we visualize our risk management data to the appropriate people at the appropriate time? And that is anywhere from, visualizations of our current risk management. How can we incorporate new data sets into those visualizations, and what does that look like? And so that's really where our focus is around data analytics, in particular on the risk management side, is how do I present that to the right people at the right time so they can make decisions?
Right.
And so far we're getting there, not as fast as probably we would like here, but we are moving in that direction. And that example I gave you earlier in this conversation is one of many where data analytics were presented to the right people at the right time. And so we were able to proactively go avoid some risk in the future.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Just kind of curious to know what platforms or technologies your organization uses. But what I'm hearing is that, and it's something I tend to agree with, you can't just launch into a data analytics program just to say you have one, right? And I realize I'm oversimplifying it a little bit here, but maybe I'm not. I've been in audit departments where data analytics was sort of central, and it's all about trying to tell a story with the data. But if you don't know what that story is, or you don't know what the plot of that story is, you can manipulate the data all you want, but if you don't really understand what you're doing or what the desired outcome is, it's not really worth the effort of what you've put into it. So I really like that point that you've made about, hey, as much as you love data analytics, you still have to go into it with a, kind of a thoughtful mindset and say, are we doing this for the right reasons? Are we doing this in the right situations? Mm-hmm. So if I share these polling results, obviously I think it looks like a lot of organizations, a majority, are using some sort of a central risk management system. About a quarter of them getting into data analytics, even down into BI. Really interested in the fact that, the automated processing, the robotic process automation, right? Any kind of artificial intelligence. I imagine that's going to maybe increase in importance in the future here. And I'm, of course, always interested to know what other is. I'll have to mine some of that information out when we look at the poll results. So I know we're nearing kind of the end of the time. Let's quickly, just kind of talking about evaluating technologies. I think the simple message we can give here is go into it with an end goal in mind. Go into any evaluation of a technology platform or a tool or a functionality, understanding what you ultimately need to get out of it. And be very thoughtful about, why you need that information, who it's going to benefit, and that'll drive you and lead you naturally to, what are those requirements that we really are most concerned about, most interested in. Okay, just to kind of sort of end this conversation on a little bit more of a human note, I'm really interested to get your guys' perspective on this. So we will all go back to the office, or will we? Right? I think this one kind of explains itself. As we know by now, the way we're working, how we're working, where we're working is undergoing a sea change. It's completely shifting. It's changing. I've been talking to people who say that our organization has never had a work from home program, and now 95% of our people are working from home. I wish I had a nickel for every time somebody said, hey, we're starting to go into a serious reevaluation of how much commercial space we need for our organization, which that topic is interesting in and of itself. So obviously the way we're working is shifting. You know, I'm really curious just to hear your general perspectives. You know, Rick, maybe I'll start with you. Kind of what are your thoughts here? What are you seeing in your organization? Where were you before this? Where do you feel like you guys are headed in this regard?
Yeah, you know, definitely an interesting topic and one that's on the front of everybody's mind. You know, as I mentioned early on, Ceridian has been pretty effective. Getting some feedback here. Pretty effective with moving to a virtual model. We already had about a quarter of our workforce that was working virtually prior to COVID-19. So it's a model we're familiar with, and we had the technology to be able to support. One of the things that we did at the beginning of the month was did a return to work survey with our employees. We had about 2,800 responses to that. And interestingly enough, about half of the people stated they're just flat out not ready to go back into an office. Mm-hmm. For a variety of reasons. 40% said they were interested in going back, but not every day. They want to be on some kind of rotational basis. There's only about 10% that said we want to get back into the office right away. So interesting from our perspective on what those results were. And the second half of that was, what is the main driver for people that do want to go back? And it was what you would expect. It's the social interaction. It's the collaboration, the productivity that, they feel that they have gains for being in an office space. The other thing we've been tracking kind of closely is what some of the other companies are doing out there. And there's a lot coming out in just the past few days on that too, with Microsoft and Amazon allowing people to work from home through October. Mm-hmm. Google, Facebook, Salesforce, and Zillow through the end of the year. And Twitter is permanent. They're allowing people to work virtually permanently now. So I think to answer the question about where will we work, my honest feeling is for companies that can do it, I think where we'll work is wherever we want. Wherever it works for us, as long as we're efficient with what we're doing. And some of the things we've looked at internally, and I've kind of put together the 3 C's for it, but the only way you can be effective is for having good communication, good connectivity, and being creative in how you're having people work virtually. And we've done a lot of things from the creatively side with Zoom meetings and having Zoom, like seeing a lot of other people doing Zoom social hours. We're doing trivia. We're doing fun things to help people stay connected through all this. And I think it does help a lot. And that's kind of my thought.
It's great feedback. I love the 3 C's. That's actually, I never really thought about it like that before, but if with your permission, I'm going to slide that one in my back pocket and keep that one. Yep. Brian, how about from your perspective? Just curious to get your thoughts on what you're seeing and just how you're dealing with this whole thing.
Yeah, so like I said, I think at the beginning, within 48 hours, we were at about 95% remote. Mm-hmm. And what we have found is a large percentage of the folks that thought they could never work remote actually really enjoy it. And so we started the process. Actually, we started with a memo to our management team yesterday in terms of what our coming back to the office will look like in terms of spacing and number of people, et cetera. I think at the end of the day, when we are through this, we're going to have a hybrid approach. We'll have people working from home anywhere from full-time to 2 or 3 days a week. We will have a much smaller office size here when this is all done. And what we've proven is we can operate pretty well remotely. We didn't see a large impact at all from our operations. But what it has done is shine put a light on the issues that we do have. And so we now have the ability to know where our pain points are and we can go fix them. And so I think to Rick's point, we're doing the same type of things with, Zoom happy hours and social time, and having that communication, that collaboration is key. One thing we did find as well, to echo what Rick said, at Cameron, we're in a small town and there's a Midwestern side to it. So we have a thing called food days, and that seems to be the number one driver of when people want to come back in the office, is to have some of that, I'll call it the non-healthy food days here, to have that collaborative environment with someone's homemade pecan pie or something along those lines. And so we're probably a while away from that where we can do that again. But we will be a hybrid office, much smaller space, and I think we're okay with that moving forward.
Yeah, and just judging, and thank you, Brian, and judging by the poll results, certainly seems like that's the general vibe out there, right? Just some sort of rotational program, maybe people saying, you know what, I'm here, I'm staying right here. Others that might still be waiting it out. Let's face it, I think Ricky, and both of you guys really brought it up. This more than anything is the real human element of this whole thing, right? We crave, we're social creatures. We crave contact with other humans, and Zoom's great, but it doesn't really substitute for sort of physical presence, right? So I definitely understand that this would be something that, I myself, and I'm sure others struggle with and are still trying to figure out, but I appreciate your guys' perspectives on that. I think the best advice we can offer is using this as a catalyst for change, or at least a catalyst for deeper analysis or thought to go into what are those programs, what are those requirements, and so forth, right? Talking to your team and keeping it human. What's going to work the best for you guys? Where do you feel safe? Where do you feel like you can best provide, the most value? And then I think a lot of that, and it doesn't necessarily say it on here, is trust. Building that trust, maintaining that trust. People are holding up their end of the bargain. It's kind of hard to say, well, you have to be physically in this office. Just my opinion. But at any rate, I really want to thank you guys. And obviously, I apologize we didn't leave a lot of time for some Q&A. There were some questions that did come in, and we'll be sure to kind of answer those in writing. But first and foremost, I want to thank Rick. I want to thank Brian for being a part of this. Really appreciate you guys and the perspectives you guys brought, the time you spent on this. I can't thank you guys enough.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Of course, and certainly thank you to everyone who dialed in, who participated today. Really appreciate having you here, and I hope everybody stays well and has a great day.